The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the mercantile, and Eleanor Matthews felt her stomach clench with a mixture of anticipation and dread as she peered through the dusty window at the town of Fort Laramie, Wyoming Territory, on this humid afternoon in July of 1876. Beside her, her mother Vivian coughed weakly into a handkerchief, the sound rattling in her chest like dice in a cup. Eleanor placed a gentle hand on the older woman's shoulder, feeling the bones too prominent beneath the faded calico dress. The journey from Philadelphia had been long and arduous, each mile carrying them further from everything familiar and closer to a future Eleanor could scarcely imagine. "We are here, Mama," Eleanor said softly, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "Fort Laramie." Vivian Matthews looked up at her daughter with eyes that had once been bright blue, but now seemed faded like old denim. "Are you certain about this, Ellie? It is not too late to turn back." But it was too late, and they both knew it. The apartment in Philadelphia had been sold to pay debts after Papa died. The factory where Eleanor had worked had closed its doors. The advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like Providence itself, a rancher in Wyoming seeking a wife, promising a good home and stability. Eleanor had written back immediately, her pen flying across the page as she composed a letter that was honest but carefully worded. She had mentioned her mother in the third letter, after Yates Peterson had already expressed his intention to send money for her passage west. His response had taken 3 weeks to arrive, and Eleanor had nearly worn through the paper from reading and rereading those simple words. "Bring your mother. There is room for both." Now, as the driver opened the door and extended his hand to help them down, Eleanor wondered what kind of man would so readily accept not just a wife he had never met, but her ailing mother as well. The main street of Fort Laramie stretched before them, a wide dirt avenue lined with wooden buildings that seemed to lean toward each other as if sharing secrets. Cowboys ambled past, their spurs jingling. A wagon loaded with supplies creaked by. Somewhere a dog barked, and the sound of a piano drifted from what was unmistakably a saloon. "Miss Matthews." Eleanor turned to find a man approaching, his hat in his hands. He was tall and lean, with sandy brown hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in summer. His face was tanned and weathered, with fine lines around his eyes that spoke of hours spent squinting into the sun. He wore clean clothes, though they were clearly work clothes, and his boots showed signs of careful polishing. "I am Eleanor Matthews," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Are you Mr. Peterson?" "Yates Peterson, yes, madam," he said, and there was something gentle in his voice that made Eleanor's shoulders relax just a fraction. His gaze moved to Vivian, who was leaning heavily on Eleanor's arm. "And this must be your mother." "Vivian Matthews," Vivian said, straightening as much as her weakened condition would allow. "I appreciate your generosity, Mr. Peterson. Not many men would welcome an old woman along with a bride." Yates stepped forward and with surprising gentleness took Vivian's other arm. "You are not old, madam, and any mother of Eleanor's is welcome in my home. Let me help you to the wagon. The ranch is about an hour's ride from town, and I imagine you are both weary from your travels." As they walked toward a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 horses, Eleanor studied Yates from the corner of her eye. He was not what she had expected, though she realized she had not known quite what to expect. He moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, and when he lifted Vivian into the wagon with careful strength, settling her on blankets he had clearly placed there in advance, Eleanor felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "I brought water and some bread and cheese in case you are hungry," Yates said, gesturing to a basket. "The ride can be rough, but I will go as slow as needed." Eleanor climbed up beside her mother while Yates secured their trunks in the back. There were only 3, containing everything they owned in the world. As Yates swung himself up onto the driver's seat and took up the reins, Eleanor found herself watching the set of his shoulders, the capable way his hands managed the horses. They rolled out of Fort Laramie heading west, and the landscape opened up before them in a way that made Eleanor's breath catch. She had seen plains before, but nothing like this. The land seemed to stretch forever, broken by rocky outcroppings and the occasional stand of cottonwood trees marking a water source. The sky was impossibly blue, and the air smelled of sage and grass and something wild she could not name. "It is beautiful," she said without thinking. Yates glanced back at her and she caught the flash of pleasure in his eyes. "I have always thought so. It can be harsh, especially in winter, but there is nowhere else I would rather be." "How long have you had your ranch, Mr. Peterson?" Vivian asked. "Please call me Yates." "I have been on the land for 8 years now. Started with nothing but a claim and a dozen cattle. I am up to nearly 200 head now, and the ranch house is solid. Built it myself with help from my neighbor, Samuel Wright." "That is quite an accomplishment," Eleanor said. 8 years of hard work." "It has been hard," Yates admitted, "but good too. I came west after the war looking for a fresh start, found it here." Eleanor heard the weight in those words and understood. Many men had come west to escape the ghosts of the war between the states. She did not press for details. Everyone carried their own burdens. As they traveled, Yates pointed out landmarks. The bend in the creek where the water ran clearest. The hill where eagles nested. The flat stretch where antelope could often be seen in the early morning. He spoke with the quiet pride of a man who knew his land intimately, and Eleanor found herself relaxing further, lulled by the steady rhythm of the wagon and the warmth of the afternoon sun. Vivian dozed against Eleanor's shoulder, and Eleanor was grateful. Her mother tired so easily now. The sickness in her lungs had been getting worse for over a year, and no doctor in Philadelphia had been able to help. Eleanor had watched her mother fade, unable to do anything but hold her hand and pray. "How is she, truly?" Yates asked quietly, his voice pitched low so as not to wake Vivian. Eleanor hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Not well. The doctors say her lungs are failing. They gave her perhaps a year, maybe less." Yates was quiet for a moment. "That must be hard for you both. It is why I had to tell you about her in my letters. I could not leave her behind, and I could not care for her on my own anymore. I understand if you are angry that I did not mention her in my first letter." "I am not angry," Yates said, and when Eleanor looked at him, she saw only sincerity in his face. "I figured you had your reasons for waiting. Truth is, the house has been mighty quiet with just me in it. Having 2 people instead of 1 suits me fine." They crested a rise, and Yates pulled the horses to a stop. "There," he said, pointing, "that is home." Below them, nestled in a valley where a creek wound through stands of cottonwood and willow, sat a ranch house. It was larger than Eleanor had expected, built of logs chinked with mud, with a stone chimney rising from one end. There was a barn, a corral with several horses, and what looked like a chicken coop. Cattle dotted the surrounding hillsides, dark shapes against the golden grass. "Oh," Eleanor breathed. "Yates, it is wonderful." He smiled, really smiled, and it transformed his face. "Wait until you see inside. I have been fixing it up since I got your first letter. Wanted to make it nice for you." As they descended into the valley, Eleanor felt a strange sensation in her chest, like something locked tight was beginning to open. This place, with its wide sky and rolling land, felt like possibility itself. The wagon pulled up in front of the house, and before Yates could even set the brake, the door flew open and a woman emerged. She was perhaps 60, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and a face that had seen its share of sun and hardship. but her eyes were kind as she hurried toward the wagon. "You must be Eleanor and Vivian," she said in a voice that carried a slight German accent. "I am Greta Wright. My husband Samuel and I have the ranch to the east. Yates asked me to come help get you settled." Yates climbed down and moved to help Vivian from the wagon. "Greta has been a good friend and neighbor. She helped me get the house ready." Greta had already taken Eleanor's hand and was pulling her toward the house. "Come, come. I have made a stew for supper and there is fresh bread. You must be exhausted from your journey." The interior of the house exceeded every hope Eleanor had harbored. The main room was spacious, with a large stone fireplace, a table that could seat 6, and windows that let in the afternoon light. Colorful rag rugs covered the floor and curtains hung at the windows. Beyond the main room, Eleanor could see a doorway leading to what must be a bedroom. "There are 2 bedrooms," Yates said, following her gaze. "The larger one is for you and your mother. I will take the smaller one." Eleanor turned to him, surprised. "That hardly seems fair. This is your home." "And now it is yours too," Yates said simply. "Your mother needs space to be comfortable. The small room suits me fine." Vivian had sunk into a chair by the fireplace, and Greta was already bustling about, ladling stew into bowls. "Sit, sit," she commanded. "Eat while it is hot. There will be time enough for talking later." The stew was rich with meat and vegetables, the bread crusty and warm, and Eleanor realized she was ravenous. Across the table, Yates ate with the methodical efficiency of a man used to fueling his body for work, but his eyes kept drifting to Eleanor, curious and cautious at once. After the meal, Greta showed them to the larger bedroom. It held a wide bed frame that Yates had clearly built himself, now fitted with a corn husk mattress and piled with quilts. There was a dresser, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and pegs on the wall for hanging clothes. "I will leave you to rest," Greta said, "but I am just 3 miles east if you need anything. Yates knows where to find me." She paused at the door, her expression softening. "He is a good man, Eleanor, one of the best I know. Give him a chance." When she was gone, Eleanor helped her mother into the bed, removing her shoes and loosening her dress. Vivian was asleep almost instantly, her breathing labored but steady. Eleanor stood looking down at her for a long moment, fighting back tears. How much time did they have left together? A year. 6 months, she found Yates outside, unhitching the horses from the wagon. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible in their intensity. "Can I help?" she asked. He glanced up, surprised. "You should rest. You have traveled a long way." "I am not fragile," Eleanor said, with more sharpness than she intended. Then, more gently, "I would like to help. I need to learn how things work here." Something shifted in Yates's expression, a kind of approval. "All right. You can help me with the evening feeding then." They worked together in companionable silence, Yates showing her how much grain to give the horses, where the chickens roosted, how to check that the barn door was properly latched. His hands were patient as he demonstrated, and he never made her feel foolish for not knowing. When the chores were done, they stood together in the gathering darkness, the first stars beginning to appear overhead. "I want to thank you," Eleanor said quietly, "for accepting my mother, for this." She gestured at the house, the land around them. "I know this is not what you expected when you placed that advertisement." Yates was quiet for a long moment. "Can I be honest with you, Eleanor, please? I expected a business arrangement, a woman who needed security, a man who needed help running a household. I expected politeness and mutual benefit and nothing more. But when I read your letters, when you wrote about your mother and your fears and your hopes, I started thinking maybe it could be more than that. Maybe we could build something real here. Does that sound foolish?" Eleanor's heart was beating fast. No, It sounds like something I hoped for but did not dare believe. He turned to face her fully, and in the dimness, she could just make out his features. I do not expect anything from you that you are not ready to give. We can take our time getting to know each other. The house is big enough that we can have our own space, but I want you to know that I am glad you are here, both of you. I am glad to be here, Eleanor said, and realized with some surprise that it was true. That night, Eleanor lay beside her sleeping mother in the big bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Wyoming night. Coyotes called in the distance. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods. The house settled and creaked around her. She thought about Yates in the other room, this man who was legally her husband though they barely knew each other. The circuit judge had been in Fort Laramie that day, and they had spoken their vows in his office with Greta and Samuel, right as witnesses. It had been brief and businesslike, but when Yates had said, "I do," his voice had been steady and sure. Eleanor had thought she would feel afraid, lying here in a strange place beside a strange man. But instead, she felt something that might have been hope. The next week settled into a rhythm that felt almost natural. Eleanor woke early, as dawn light filtered through the windows and started the fire in the stove. She made coffee and biscuits while Yates did the morning chores. They ate breakfast together, mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable silence broken by occasional observations about the weather or the cattle or the way the garden was coming along. After breakfast, Yates headed out to work on the ranch while Eleanor tended to the house and her mother. Vivian had good days and bad days. On the good days, she sat in the rocking chair by the window and helped Eleanor with mending or snapping beans. On the bad days, she stayed in bed, coughing until her face turned red and her hands shook. Eleanor threw herself into making the house a home. She reorganized the kitchen to her liking, planted herbs in a small patch near the door, and began working on a quilt from scraps of fabric she found in a trunk Greta had brought over. In the afternoons, when the heat was at its peak, Yates would often come back to the house for a drink of water or a bite to eat. Eleanor found herself listening for the sound of his boots on the porch, and she scolded herself for the small thrill that ran through her when he appeared. They talked more as the days passed. Small conversations at first about practical matters, where things were kept, what supplies they needed from town, which animals needed attention. But gradually, the conversations deepened. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Eleanor asked about his family. Yates was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "I had a brother, James. He died at Gettysburg. My parents passed the year after, one right after the other. I think losing James broke something in them." "I am sorry," Eleanor said softly. "It was a long time ago, but that is why I came west. Too many ghosts back in Ohio." He paused. "What about your father? You have not spoken of him." "He died 2 years ago. He worked at the shipyards in Philadelphia. An accident." Eleanor felt the familiar tightness in her chest. "We managed for a while after, Mama and I. But then Mama got sick, and the medical bills piled up, and I lost my position at the factory when they closed. Everything just fell apart." Yates reached over and covered her hand with his. It was the first time he had touched her beyond helping her up into the wagon or handing her something across the table. His hand was warm and calloused and steady. "You are safe now," he said. "Both of you. I promise you that." Eleanor looked at him, at the sincerity in his creek water eyes, and felt something shift inside her. This was not just gratitude she was feeling. It was something more, something that made her breath catch and her skin warm. On Sundays, Greta and Samuel Wright came for dinner, and sometimes other neighbors would stop by. Eleanor met the postmaster from Fort Laramie and his wife, a young couple who had taken up a claim to the south. and an old trapper named Henry who had stories that made them all laugh until their sides hurt. Eleanor began to feel part of something, a community that looked out for one another in this wild and sometimes harsh land. She was no longer just surviving. She was living. One hot afternoon in August, Eleanor was in the garden picking tomatoes when she heard the thunder of hooves. She looked up to see Yates riding hard toward the house, his horse lathered with sweat. Fear shot through her. He pulled up short and swung down from the saddle. "Where is your mother?" "Inside, resting." "What is wrong?" "I need to ride to Fort Laramie for the doctor. One of my cattle has anthrax. If it spreads to the others, I could lose the whole herd. I will be gone overnight, maybe longer." Eleanor felt her stomach clench. What should I do? Stay away from the cattle. Keep the doors and windows closed. There is a rifle over the door and a pistol in the desk drawer. "Do you know how to shoot?" "My father taught me." "Good. I do not expect trouble, but I like knowing you can protect yourself if needed." He paused, clearly torn. "I hate leaving you. We will be fine," Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. "Go, save your herd." He looked at her for a long moment, then did something that shocked them both. He leaned in and kissed her forehead, quick and gentle. "I will be back as soon as I can." Then he was gone, riding east toward Fort Laramie, and Eleanor stood in the garden with her hand pressed to her forehead where his lips had been. That night, Eleanor locked all the doors and windows despite the heat. She checked on Vivian, who was having one of her bad days and had slept through all the commotion. She retrieved the pistol from the desk and set it on the table beside her chair. The hours crept by. Eleanor tried to sew but kept pricking her fingers. She tried to read but could not concentrate. Finally, she just sat by the window, watching the darkness and listening to every sound. Around midnight, the coyotes started up, their yips and howls echoing across the valley. The sound raised the hairs on Eleanor's arms, even though she knew they were likely far away. Then the cattle started lowing, restless and disturbed, and Eleanor's hand moved to the pistol. A sound on the porch made her heart leap into her throat. Footsteps, definitely footsteps, slow and deliberate. Eleanor grabbed the pistol and moved to the door, her mouth dry. "Who is there?" She called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "Madam, it is Owen Miller from the ranch south of here. Saw your lights on and Yates's horse is gone. Wanted to make sure you and your mother are all right." Eleanor recognized the name. Owen and his wife Sarah had come for dinner 2 Sundays ago. She cracked the door open, pistol still in her hand, and saw Owen standing there with his hat in his hands and an apologetic expression on his young face. "I am sorry to frighten you, madam. Sarah made me promise to check on you when we saw Yates riding past our place like the devil was chasing him." Eleanor lowered the pistol, relief flooding through her. "That is very kind. We are well, just nervous with Yates gone." "Understandable. Would you like me to bed down in your barn tonight, just to give you peace of mind?" Eleanor hesitated, knowing Yates would not want her to be alone but also aware of propriety. "That is very generous, but I could not ask that of you." "You did not ask, madam. I am offering. And Sarah would skin me alive if I left you out here alone and something happened." He grinned, and Eleanor could see he was barely older than she was, probably not more than 25. In the end, Eleanor agreed, grateful for the presence of another person nearby. Owen settled into the barn with his bedroll, and Eleanor finally felt secure enough to try to sleep. Yates returned the following afternoon, exhausted and covered in dust. The veterinarian had come and quarantined the sick animal, giving instructions on how to prevent the disease from spreading. It would be a tense few weeks, but the herd could be saved. When Yates saw Owen Miller's horse still in the barn, his jaw tightened. Eleanor quickly explained, and she watched the tension drain from his shoulders. "That was good thinking," he said. I should have arranged for someone to stay before I left. I managed, Eleanor said. But I will admit I am glad you are back. Something passed between them then, a look that held more than words could convey. Yates reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. I was worried about you, he said quietly. The whole ride there and back, I kept thinking about you here alone, wondering if you were safe. I was thinking of you too, Eleanor admitted, hoping you would return safely. They stood there in the afternoon sun, hands clasped, and Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that what she felt for this man was no longer just gratitude or companionship. It was love, real and deep and true. September brought cooler weather and the first hints of autumn color in the cottonwood leaves. Vivian had rallied somewhat, enjoying the crisp air and the beauty of the changing season. She and Eleanor spent long afternoons on the porch, Vivian wrapped in quilts, talking about everything and nothing. "He is a good man, your Yates," Vivian said one day, her voice soft and raspy. "He is," Eleanor agreed, her hands busy with her knitting. "You love him." Eleanor's hands stilled. She had not said the words aloud, had barely admitted them fully to herself. "Yes, I do. Does he know?" "I do not know. We have not spoken of such things." Vivian reached over and patted her daughter's hand. "Life is short, Ellie, shorter than we ever think. Do not waste time on fear." That evening, after supper had been cleared and Vivian had retired to bed, Eleanor found Yates in the barn checking on a mare that was due to foal any day. The lantern light cast golden shadows across his face as he ran his hands expertly over the horse's belly. "She will go tonight or tomorrow, I think," he said, not looking up. "I have been sleeping out here to keep watch, in the barn. Yates, you will freeze. I have blankets. She might need help and I want to be here." He finally looked at her and his expression softened. "But I appreciate your concern." Eleanor took a breath, gathering her courage. "Yates, can we talk?" He straightened, immediately attentive. "Of course. Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. I just need to say something, and I am afraid if I do not say it now, I will lose my nerve." She twisted her hands together. "When I came here, I thought this would be a practical arrangement. I needed security, you needed a wife. I thought we might become friends if we were lucky. But Yates, somewhere along the way it became more than that for me. I do not just respect you or appreciate you, I love you." The words hung in the air between them. Yates stood very still, his eyes searching her face. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his features, and it was like watching the sun break through clouds. "Eleanor," he said, his voice rough with emotion. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides and took her face in his hands. "I have loved you since your 3rd letter, when you wrote about your mother and your fears and your dreams. I have loved you since you stepped off that stagecoach looking scared but determined. I have loved you watching you make this house a home and care for your mother and learn about the ranch. I love you so much it terrifies me." And then he was kissing her, and Eleanor was kissing him back, and it was nothing like the brief ceremony in the judge's office. This was real and deep and full of promise. His hands were gentle on her face, in her hair, and Eleanor felt like she might dissolve from the warmth flooding through her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I should have told you sooner. We are telling each other now," Eleanor said. "That is what matters." That night, they sat together on the porch, Eleanor leaning against Yates's shoulder as they watched the stars wheel overhead. They talked about the future, about growing the ranch, about the life they would build together. And for the first time since arriving in Wyoming, Eleanor felt completely at peace. The mare foaled 2 nights later, a healthy colt that wobbled to its feet within an hour of being born. Eleanor sat with Yates in the straw, watching the miracle of new life, and felt her heart swell with happiness. "We will have a good life here," Yates said softly, his arm around her shoulders. I promise you that. We already do, Eleanor replied. October brought the first hard frost and the need to prepare for winter. Yates and Samuel Wright, along with Owen Miller and a few other neighboring ranchers, went on a hunting trip to stock up on meat for the cold months ahead. They returned 4 days later with 2 elk and 3 deer, and the women spent days preserving the meat, canning and smoking and salting. Eleanor worked alongside Greta and Sarah Miller, learning techniques she had never needed in the city. Her hands grew chapped from the work, her back ached from bending over the smoking racks, but she felt a deep satisfaction in the labor. This was her home, her family, her future she was building with her own 2 hands. Vivian continued to fade. The good days became fewer, the bad days longer. She spent most of her time now in the rocking chair by the fire, a quilt over her lap, watching the world through the window. But she was content. Eleanor could see that. There was a peace in her mother's eyes that had not been there in Philadelphia. One evening in late October, as the first snow of the season fell outside, Vivian called Eleanor and Yates to her side. I want to thank you both, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yates, for giving an old woman a beautiful place to spend her final days. Eleanor, for being the best daughter a mother could ask for. Mama, do not talk like that, Eleanor said, tears already starting. Hush now. We both know what is coming, and that is all right. I am ready. Vivian looked at Yates. You will take care of my girl with my life, Yates said solemnly. Good. And Eleanor, you will let him. You will not be so stubborn and independent that you push away love. Eleanor laughed through her tears. I will try, Mama. That is all I ask. Vivian closed her eyes, a small smile on her lips. I am very tired now. I think I will sleep. She died 3 days later, quietly in the night, with Eleanor holding one hand and Yates holding the other. The doctor said her heart had simply given out, worn down by the disease in her lungs and the hard years before. They buried Vivian on the hillside overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree that would shade her grave in summer. The whole community came to pay their respects. Greta brought food, Sarah brought flowers from her last blooming plants, and even old Henry the trapper showed up in his cleanest buckskins. Eleanor stood at the graveside and read from her mother's Bible, her voice breaking but never failing. Yates stood beside her, solid and supportive, his hand on her back. When the service was done and the grave filled, Eleanor placed wildflowers on the fresh earth and said goodbye to the woman who had given her life and love and a chance at happiness. The grief was sharp and deep, but Eleanor did not drown in it. She had work to do, a household to run, a husband to care for. And slowly, day by day, the sharp edges of loss smoothed into something she could carry. Winter came on hard and fast. The snow piled up around the house, sometimes drifting higher than the windows. Yates spent hours each day breaking ice in the water troughs and making sure the cattle had access to feed. Eleanor kept the house warm and the meals hot, and in the evenings they sat by the fire and talked or read aloud to each other from the few books they owned. It was during one of those long winter evenings that Eleanor realized she was with child. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not been certain until her body began to change in ways she could not ignore. She was frightened and excited in equal measure, and she could not wait to tell Yates. She chose a night when the wind was howling outside but the house was warm and cozy. Yates was reading, his face relaxed and peaceful in the firelight. Eleanor set down her knitting and cleared her throat. Yates, I have something to tell you. He looked up immediately, marked his place, and gave her his full attention. What is it? I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby. For a moment, Yates just stared at her. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He was across the room in an instant, pulling her into his arms, laughing and spinning her around. A baby, Eleanor, truly, truly. I think sometime in late spring or early summer. He set her down gently, suddenly careful, his hands going to her still flat belly. Are you well? Do you need anything? Should we send for the doctor? Eleanor laughed, covering his hands with hers. I am well. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. But we will send for the doctor when the time comes. That night, they moved Eleanor's things into Yates's smaller room, and for the first time, they shared a bed as husband and wife in truth. Yates was gentle and patient, treating Eleanor like something precious, and Eleanor gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. Afterward, as they lay tangled together under the quilts, Yates traced patterns on her shoulder and said, I never thought I could be this happy. Neither did I, Eleanor whispered. But here we are. Winter eventually loosened its grip, and spring arrived in a rush of green and birdsong. Eleanor's belly grew round and prominent. She moved more slowly now, but she refused to be treated like an invalid. She still tended her garden, still cooked and cleaned, still helped with the easier chores. Yates was beside himself with worry and excitement. He finished building a cradle from cottonwood wood, sanding it smooth and rubbing it with beeswax until it glowed. Greta and Sarah organized a gathering of the neighboring women, and they arrived one sunny April afternoon with gifts, handmade clothes and blankets and diapers. You are part of our community now, Greta said, pressing a beautifully embroidered baby gown into Eleanor's hands. We take care of our own. Eleanor, hormonal and emotional, burst into tears and hugged every single one of them. The baby came on a hot night in early July, almost exactly a year after Eleanor had arrived in Fort Laramie. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Eleanor thought she could not continue. But Greta was there, coaching her through, and Yates was there, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. And finally, as dawn broke over the valley, their son was born. He came into the world red-faced and squalling, perfect in every way. Yates cut the cord with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face, and when Greta placed the baby in Eleanor's arms, Eleanor felt a love so fierce and overwhelming she could hardly breathe. What will you name him? Greta asked. Eleanor looked at Yates and they shared a smile. They had discussed this many times over the winter months. James Vivian Peterson, Yates said, for our parents. The baby, as if recognizing his name, stopped crying and opened his eyes, unfocused but searching. Eleanor counted 10 tiny fingers and 10 tiny toes, marveling at the miracle they had created. Life with a baby was exhausting and wonderful. James was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in stretches long enough for Eleanor to rest. Yates was besotted, spending every spare moment staring at his son with an expression of absolute wonder. The ranch prospered. The cattle herd grew. Yates hired a young man named Thomas to help with the heavier work, and the extra hands meant Yates could spend more time near the house, near Eleanor and James. On James's first birthday, they had a party. All the neighbors came, and there was food and music and laughter. Old Henry brought a wooden horse he had carved, and James immediately tried to eat it, much to everyone's amusement. Eleanor stood on the porch watching the celebration, Yates's arm around her waist, and thought about the terrified woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 2 years ago. That Eleanor had been desperate and frightened, clinging to hope by her fingernails. This Eleanor was strong and loved and home. Happy, Yates murmured in her ear. More than I ever dreamed possible, Eleanor replied. The years flowed by like water, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. When James was 3, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. 2 years later came another son, William. The house that had once seemed so spacious now rang with the sounds of children playing, laughing, sometimes fighting. Yates expanded the ranch, buying the neighboring property when old Henry decided to retire and move to town. Thomas married Sarah Miller's younger sister and built a house on the eastern edge of the property. Greta and Samuel became like grandparents to the children, always available for babysitting or advice. Eleanor started a small school in Fort Laramie, teaching the children of the surrounding ranches and farms. She rode into town 3 days a week, proud of her ability to contribute to the community in yet another way. Sometimes, on quiet evenings after the children were in bed, Eleanor would walk up the hill to her mother's grave. The cottonwood had grown tall and strong, and Eleanor had planted wildflowers that bloomed each spring. She would sit there in the fading light and tell her mother about the children, about the ranch, about the life she had built. "You would be so proud of them, Mama," she would say. "James has your eyes, Rose has your stubbornness, William has your kind heart, and Yates, he is everything you hoped he would be and more." On their 10th anniversary, Yates surprised Eleanor with a trip to Denver. They left the children with Greta and Samuel and took the train, staying in a real hotel and eating in restaurants and seeing a play at the Opera House. It was wonderful and exciting, but by the 3rd day, Eleanor was ready to go home. "I miss them," she admitted as they sat in the hotel restaurant. "I miss the children, the ranch, even our chickens." Yates laughed and took her hand. "So do I. Let us finish our meal and head back tomorrow instead of waiting until the end of the week. Are you certain? I do not want to ruin your plans." "Eleanor, you are my plan. You and our children and our life together. Anywhere you are is where I want to be." They returned to the ranch to find that William had lost his first tooth, and Rose had learned to braid her hair, and James had helped Thomas repair a section of fence. The children tackled their parents with hugs and stories, and that night, Eleanor lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of home and felt her heart overflow with contentment. More years passed. The children grew. James became interested in ranching, following Yates everywhere and absorbing knowledge like a sponge. Rose showed a talent for teaching, often organizing elaborate lessons for her younger brother. William loved animals and spent hours in the barn, gentle and patient with even the most difficult horses. When Eleanor turned 40, Yates threw her a party that brought people from ranches and towns as far as 50 miles away. The celebration lasted 2 days, and Eleanor danced until her feet ached and laughed until her sides hurt. "You have built something special here," Sarah Miller told her during a quiet moment. "Not just a ranch, but a real community. People help each other because you taught us how." Eleanor protested, but Sarah shook her head. "It is true. You came here a stranger and made this place better just by being in it." That night, Eleanor and Yates walked together under the stars, hand in hand as they had done countless times before. "You ever regret it?" Eleanor asked. "Sending for a mail-order bride instead of finding someone local." Yates stopped and turned to face her. The moonlight silvered his hair, which had gone gray at the temples, and highlighted the lines experience had etched into his face. But his eyes were the same creek water green that had captivated her from the beginning. "Regret finding the love of my life. Regret building a family and a home with the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever known." He cupped her face in his hands. "Eleanor, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. Even if you had come alone without your mother, it would have been the best decision. But the fact that you came with such love and devotion for her, that you were willing to risk everything to keep her safe and comfortable in her final days, that just made me love you more." Eleanor felt tears spill down her cheeks. After all these years, he could still move her to tears with his words. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much. And I love you. Always have, always will." They stood there in the moonlight, two people who had found each other across a vast distance, who had built a life together through hard work and devotion, who had created something beautiful and lasting. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The ranch house stood solid behind them, lights glowing warm in the windows, holding their children safe in sleep. This was home. This was love. This was everything. James grew into a fine young man, tall and capable like his father, with Eleanor's determination and compassion. At 20, he married the daughter of a rancher from the north, a lovely girl named Catherine, and they built a house on the western edge of the property. Within a year, they presented Yates and Eleanor with their first grandchild, a little girl they named Vivian Eleanor. When Eleanor held her granddaughter for the first time, she wept. The baby had her mother's eyes, and seeing that made Eleanor feel connected across time to the woman buried on the hillside. Rose attended college in Denver, one of the first women from Fort Laramie to do so. She studied to be a teacher and returned home to take over the school Eleanor had started, expanding it and bringing new ideas and methods. She married a lawyer from town, and they split their time between Fort Laramie and the ranch. William surprised everyone by studying veterinary medicine. He set up practice in Fort Laramie and became the go-to resource for every rancher and farmer in 3 counties. He married late, at 30, but when he did, it was to a widow with 2 children of her own, and he loved them as if they were his own blood. Eleanor and Yates grew old together, their hair turning white, their bodies moving slower, but their love never diminishing. They sat on the porch in the evenings, rocking in chairs James had built for them, watching the sun set over the land they had tamed and nurtured. "Do you remember the day we met?" Eleanor asked one evening. They were in their 60s now, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. "Every detail," Yates said. "You stepped off that stagecoach looking like you were facing down a firing squad, determined but terrified." Eleanor laughed. I had no idea what to expect, and then there you were, kind and gentle, welcoming not just me but my mother too. How could I not? She was part of you, and I already loved you from your letters. You never told me that you loved me from my letters, did I not?" "Well, it is true. The way you wrote about your fears and your hopes, the way you were so honest and vulnerable, I fell in love with your heart before I ever saw your face." Eleanor reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. "We have had a good life, Yates Peterson, the best life, and it is not over yet." "No," Eleanor agreed. "Not yet." They lived to see their grandchildren grow and have children of their own. The ranch passed to James, who ran it with the same dedication and love his father had shown. The family gathered every Sunday for dinner, the house full of noise and laughter and life. On a warm summer evening when Eleanor was 68 and Yates was 72, they walked together up the hill to Vivian's grave. The cottonwood was massive now, its shade cool and welcoming. They sat together beneath it, leaning against the trunk, looking out over the valley that had been their home for so long. "Thank you," Eleanor said softly. "For what? For everything. For saying there was room for both. For building a life with me, for loving me." Yates kissed her temple. "Eleanor, loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done. You are my heart." They sat there until the stars came out, talking about the past and the future, about their children and grandchildren, about the ranch and the community they had helped build. And when they finally walked back down the hill, hand in hand, they were still as in love as they had been that first time Yates had kissed her in the barn all those years ago. Eleanor lived to be 76, and when she passed, it was quietly in her sleep with Yates beside her. The whole community turned out for her funeral, and they buried her on the hillside next to her mother. The service lasted hours, with person after person standing to speak about what Eleanor had meant to them, how she had helped them, how she had made their lives better. Yates only spoke briefly. "She was the love of my life," he said, his voice breaking. "And every day with her was a gift." He lived 2 more years, tending the ranch with James's help, playing with his great-grandchildren, sitting on the hillside talking to Eleanor as if she could hear him. And maybe she could. Who was to say, when Yates died, they buried him next to Eleanor, under the cottonwood that had become a family landmark. The 3 graves sat together, Vivian and Eleanor and Yates, bound by love and sacrifice and the wild beauty of the Wyoming land. The ranch stayed in the Peterson family for generations. The house was expanded and updated but never torn down. The barn where Eleanor and Yates had first confessed their love was maintained as a family treasure. The hillside where 3 people rested became a place of peace and reflection. And when the family gathered, as they did every year on the anniversary of the day Eleanor had stepped off that stagecoach, they would tell the story. The mail-order bride who came with her elderly mother. The cowboy who said there was room for both. The love that had grown between them, strong and true and lasting. It was a story of courage and kindness, of taking chances and opening hearts. It was a story of family and community, of building something lasting in a wild and beautiful place. It was a love story, pure and simple, and it echoed through the years, reminding each new generation that love, real love, could conquer anything. The children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would stand on that hillside, looking out over the ranch that Eleanor and Yates had built, and they would understand. They were part of something bigger than themselves, something that had started with a desperate letter and a generous heart, something that had grown into a legacy of love. And on warm summer evenings, when the wind whispered through the cottonwood leaves, it almost sounded like voices. Eleanor and Vivian and Yates still there, still together, still watching over the family and the land they had loved so well. The story did not end with their deaths. It continued in every child who learned to ride a horse on that ranch. In every couple who looked at each other the way Eleanor and Yates had looked at each other. In every act of kindness, every open door, every welcome extended to a stranger who needed help, because that was the real legacy. Not the land or the cattle or the house, though those things mattered. The real legacy was the lesson that there is always room for one more, that love multiplies rather than divides, that taking a chance on someone, opening your heart and your home, can change not just your life but the lives of generations to come. James told his children about their grandparents. His children told their children, and so the story was passed down, growing richer with each telling, becoming part of the family mythology. The mail-order bride and the cowboy who had loved her, the elderly mother who had been welcomed, the life they had built together against all odds. On the 200th anniversary of the day Eleanor had arrived in Fort Laramie, the family held a celebration. They came from all over the country, Petersons and descendants of the Millers and the Wrights, and all the other families who had been part of that original community. They gathered on the ranch, now a sprawling operation but still recognizable as the place Eleanor and Yates had built. A young woman named Eleanor, named for her great-great-great-grandmother, stood on the hillside by the 3 graves and read from the original letters. The letters Eleanor had written to Yates, full of hope and fear and honesty. The letters Yates had written back, kind and welcoming and open, when she got to the letter where Yates had written, "Bring your mother." "There is room for both," her voice broke. Everyone gathered there understood the significance of those words, how they had changed everything, how they had started a legacy of inclusion and love that continued to this day. The celebration lasted 3 days. There was food and music and dancing. Stories were told and retold. Old photographs were passed around, showing Eleanor and Yates at different stages of their lives, always together, always in love. On the final evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, the whole family gathered on the hillside. Hundreds of people, all connected by the love of two people who had taken a chance on each other so many years ago. "To Eleanor and Yates," someone called out, raising a glass. "To Eleanor and Yates," the crowd echoed. And in that moment, standing on the land those two had loved and nurtured, surrounded by the family they had created, it felt as if they were there too. Not gone, just different. Part of the earth and the sky and the cottonwood tree. Part of everything. The story of Eleanor and Yates Peterson became more than just a family tale. It became part of the history of Fort Laramie, of Wyoming, of the West itself. Historians wrote about them as an example of mail-order marriages that succeeded. Romance writers used them as inspiration. Their letters were preserved in a museum, their story told to schoolchildren learning about frontier life. But for the family, they were never just historical figures. They were Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa Yates, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They were love and strength, and the reminder that home is not a place, but the people you choose to build a life with. The ranch still operates today, now in its 7th generation of Peterson ownership. The house has been expanded again and again, but the original room where Eleanor and Vivian stayed that first night is preserved exactly as it was. Visitors can see the bed frame Yates built, the washstand, the pegs on the wall. The barn, too, is maintained, though it is no longer used for animals. It has become a gathering place for family events, weddings and anniversaries and birthdays. And everyone who marries there knows they are standing in the place where Eleanor and Yates first declared their love. The hillside remains sacred ground. The 3 graves are tended with care, always covered in fresh flowers. The cottonwood, ancient now and hollow in the middle, is supported with cables to keep it from toppling. As long as the family has any say, that tree will stand, a living monument to the love that started everything. And sometimes, if you sit quietly under that cottonwood on a warm summer evening, you can almost hear them. Eleanor's laugh, bright and free. Yates's low voice, steady and sure. Vivian's gentle wisdom. The sound of a family being born, of love taking root and growing strong. The wind whispers through the leaves, carrying their story forward into the future, ensuring that as long as there are Petersons in Wyoming, as long as there is a ranch in that valley, the tale will be remembered. The mail-order bride who came with her elderly mother. The cowboy who said there was room for both. And the love that proved big enough to encompass not just 2 people, but generations upon generations, stretching forward into a future they never could have imagined but would certainly have loved. That is the true ending. Not death, but continuance. Not goodbye, but rather see you later. Not the end of the story, but the beginning of countless others, all rooted in the same soil, watered by the same tears and laughter, growing toward the same wide Wyoming sky. Eleanor and Yates Peterson lived and loved and built something that would outlast them by centuries. They proved that kindness matters, that love is a choice you make every day, that family is what you create rather than just what you are born into. And in the end, is that not what we all hope for? To love and be loved, to build something meaningful, to leave the world a little better than we found it. Eleanor and Yates did all that and more. Their story started with such uncertainty on that dusty afternoon in 1876, became a testament to the power of taking chances and opening hearts. There is room for both, Yates had written. There is room for love and fear, for past and future, for who we were and who we want to become. There is always room if we are willing to make it. That was their gift. That is their legacy. And that is why, more than a century later, people still tell their story, still visit the ranch, still stand on that hillside and look out over the valley and think about what it means to truly love someone. The story ends where it began, with hope. With the belief that tomorrow can be better than today. With the understanding that love, real love, the kind that Eleanor and Yates shared, is worth any risk, any sacrifice, any leap of faith. They found each other across a vast distance, two lonely people reaching for something better. They built a life together in a wild and beautiful place. They created a family that grew and flourished. They loved each other through good times and bad, through joy and sorrow, through all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that make up a life. And when their time came, when they finally laid down to rest under that cottonwood tree, they did so knowing they had done it right. They had loved fully and completely. They had been loved in return. They had mattered. What more could anyone ask? The sun sets over the Wyoming valley, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. The cottonwood rustles in the evening breeze. The ranch house lights flicker on one by one. Somewhere a child laughs. A door opens and closes. Life goes on as it always has, as it always will. And three spirits rest easy on the hillside, wrapped in the love they created, surrounded by the legacy they built, knowing that their story will never truly end as long as there are people who believe in the power of love to transform lives. There was room for both, Yates had said. And there still is. There always will be. That is the promise. That is the hope. That is the happy ending they earned and the future they ensured. The end.